Okay. We're on. Okay, we are live. There is no one watching so far, so we'll wait for people to...
Speak of the devil.
Ooh, is there people dinging already? Hello. So let's have a look at comments. Have that up.
No, it's just you saying that we're live.
Ooh. Nice. Okay. Cool. Okay. Well, we're recording anyway. It is live on a Tuesday night in slightly cooler than usual April.
We might even get more than like 1 millimeter of rain if this keeps up.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's like there was a shiny veneer on everything this morning. I was like, what's going on?
The sky water has fallen.
Sky
yes.
water, yes. Yeah, we're going to go dance around a fire more often, I think, because we need more rain over here.
It's certainly been very cold, but it's also been very dry as well.
Yeah.
It's like finding myself getting parched all the time, even though it's like 20 degrees outside. It's quite weird.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so welcome to Lightbox, the Wanimate podcast, where the Wanimate community come together to wax lyrical about animation in Western Australia and beyond. Tonight, we have David O'Connell, Lindsay Flay,
Hi there.
and myself, Tanya Beeson. And we're going to just talk animation at you because some interesting things have been happening, and it's worth sort of having a little bit of a history lesson to sort of see where we've all come from and what this is all doing. And considering there's 3 dinosaurs sitting in front of you on the screen here to talk about animation in the olden days.
The olden days, like, the 2010s or something.
Yeah.
That's when I discovered I was an old person in my ancient age of 38.
I think the history we've got written down might actually only hit last century. So
Well, I can probably take you a century before, but it won't be animated. It'd be more like cartoons.
There was
especially kids' cartoons that make adults' hair curl. So
there's a distinct point when my students stopped calling me Miss and started calling me Ma'am. So
wow.
I'm still a sir. That's my problem. Yeah. No, when I first worked at what was it now? At Endzone Games, I found myself confronted with I just walked out of Animal about 2 years before, so I'd just come from AAA movies and oh gosh, Happy Feet and Charlotte's Web and stuff, and I'd kind of landed on Earth after a fresh new pacemaker, thinking, what the hell am I going to do with my life back in Perth? And I've picked up a gig at Endzone Games as a world builder. So, how can I put my layout skills to good use? And yeah, it's weird when you'd be talking about, well, you're going to build this whole world and you're going to do all this stuff. What, just me? Where's the rest of the crew on this? So I had to solo the world for a while there. But I remember the room going dead quiet when I'd say something and like, oh, Granddad talked again. Tell us about the good old days. And I was like, what? I mean, the good old days of like 18 months ago when I had a job. It was just weird. I didn't expect generational change within like, my 30s. But it's true.
We'll go further back than that, though. So, shall we start this and go through some basic news?
True. Yes. Okay, so the 3:30 animation competition is still on. We are in week 4. Is this week 4, Lindsay?
Something like that.
Of the 12 or so weeks that make up the 3 months, that is the 3 part of that title. The 30 seconds of animation that everyone is completing over that time. A lot of people are already well into creating some awesome stuff that I've been spying on and seeing. So it's quite cool. And the prizes have been announced. It's all very exciting. Cool. So we have renamed our categories for the international world because Australia has different terms for these things. So, but we have an open category, which is our professional animation level and graduates, people who've gone out into the world and started animating. So there's 1,000 Australian dollars in cash, trophy, a whole bunch of software and hardware coming from the various sponsors, and you can see all the sponsors at the bottom. Toon Boom, Foundry, Dell, Wacom, and there's going to be a bit of merchandise.
Autodesk, StockFX.
That's cool. Yes. So Higher Ed is giving us getting 500 Australian dollars in cash, a trophy, software and hardware from Toon Boom, Foundry, Dell, Wacom, and merch as well. And the school age category is $250 a year cash, software and hardware. And all our sponsors for the animation, for the 330 animation competition, Winemate, West Australian Animation Association, of course, because we run it, but Autodesk, Wacom, Storm FX, Cinefest Oz, Flying Bark, Toon Boom, Dell, Intraware, Redbird Creative, Quixel Studios, Event Cinemas, Foundry, Sandbox, and AccessReal.com. All definitely contributing to an awesome competition.
They're not small fry.
No, it's not bad.
I think last year's prize included a copy of Nuke. So for those of you who know Nuke, it's AAA compositing software. It's pretty expensive.
I haven't seen the list of software that they're getting, but
it's pretty respectable.
We won't promise a copy of Nuke straight up because that might not happen this year. So
nice.
We don't know. But Travis is probably watching, going, "Oh, you guys are talking." No. Yes, exactly that. Okay, where are we at? We're in the history period. Ooh, let's
Shall we
start this off. Yeah, we'll start with
what prompted this.
We'll jump back and sort of get out of that because I've preempted a little bit of the discussion. The lead up to this was the Oscars, and I'm sure you all, as an audience, heard about the controversy of the Oscars.
Well, I heard about animation being dissed as a kids thing only. That was the thing I heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apparently there was a fight outside with the bouncers or something. But
that's the one we're talking about.
That's the one we're talking about.
So not only with the host's speech, but several of the people doing presenting, the implication across all of their dialogue, their speeches, was that animation was for little kids and something adults had to put up with. And I take exception of this because I work in this industry. I don't watch a lot of animation. And sure, I love kids animation, but I also love a lot of adults animation as well. So
there was a documentary actually sitting there as one of the contenders for the best animation film.
Yeah. But I'm sort of resigned to that. It's something I've come across all my life, all my working career, pretty much. Where you deal with people that, oh yes, we do this film and got decades of history and experience, and they have literally negative experience with animation. It's not a question like, oh, I don't know anything about animation. It's sort of like half the time. It's like you have to unlearn what they've learned.
But I honestly thought we're over this period of time from like 90 videos days when Legend of the Overfiend had to be taken from the kids section and put in its own animated section. Just away from everything else, basically.
Well, even the Ralph Bakshi stuff from the late 60s, early 70s.
Yep.
And there's all that. You could argue that half the cartoons and the swinging jazz numbers with Betty Boo and all that stuff was made expressly for adults. It wasn't wasted on kids.
That's what we're going to get into. Brief history
rundown.
So us oldies are gonna regale you with a little bit of the history of this and animation.
Before pixel art.
Yeah. So animation in its early days, I'm talking. Let's wind the clock forward a little bit. So we're not talking about Muybridge or those early tests and the phenakistoscope and the zoetrope, or we're all aware of those things as tools for animation. When animation starts going into film and onto film, okay, we're talking about the early adopters of that. So like your Winsor McKays and your Pat Sullivans, and some of the awesome and interesting animations that they did were definitely not aimed at kids. They were experimenting with a new bit of technology. And
they were like tech demos, really.
Yeah.
That's how we describe them these days.
Felix the cat has a level of risque to it. Early.
The early Mickey Mouse is a trickster and a prankster. In fact, a lot of those early characters are. And that's
functions as we'd see animation today, and that kind of two-tiered humor as well. There's something in there that the adults are just going to find ribald and funny, and it's even pushed it more so in some ways than today.
I would take that back even further, because if you look at, say, turn of the last century's comic strips, say like the Cats and Gemma Kids, which arguably is one of the United States' first, I think it's regarded as their first ethnic comic strip. It's basically, well, not manga, but it's essentially comics. And it's about these two kids that get up to hijinks, and half the finishing pictures on all their adventures of them getting their bum spanked. Well, they're sitting in the time crying while all these stern adults are going, about time to, and while they're busy cleaning up the carnage that these two little rascals have kind of unleashed on the town. And that goes back even further. There's an old German, like almost previous century, was it Maximorius or Maximoritz? Pardon my appalling pronunciation. And this is a very famous folktale written in verse, very sparkling verse, but it was illustrated like a comic. And it has more in common with Itchy and Scratchy than it does with a nice, heartwarming little kids' cartoon. It's basically these two naughty little children that get up to all kinds of pranks, and they do things like hide cockroaches inside. One of the townsfolk's bed gets filled up with cockroaches. They fill up their teacher's pipe, big old pipe with gunpowder, and nearly blows his head off. And they're doing all this stuff. They're stealing pies and doing all this sort of thing. And eventually the adults take their revenge. And I think the first one to take their revenge on that sixth prank is where the baker bakes them in pies, puts them into an oven. But they escape by eating the crispy crust and make their way. And the very last prank they pull blows up in their face, where they're dragged off in a sack off to the miller, who grinds them into little tiny pieces. And there's this fantastic picture of these two outlines of these bad little boys described in little bits of millet, like they've been ground into they've been poured on the ground and they've turned into their shapes, and then the ducks eat them. Meanwhile, all the adults and parents back home are coming home like, job well done, peace and unity, peace and unity and security finally at large. I'm thinking, so this looks like one of the early heartwarming tales, young fascists.
That's a Blumhouse movie, man. That's a Blumhouse movie.
Now, I came across this when I was working with Thomas Kaiser. Now, Thomas Kaiser was my collaborator on the Magic Portal, and he did all the sound recording work and stuff like that. Fantastic designer. He's still working in the biz in Montreal, I think. Oh, no, Vancouver, pardon me. Sorry, Thomas. I just remember when we were doing all the recording of sound effects for the Magic Portal for one glorious year and a half. Or was it 2 years? I can't remember now. But he had this bedroom in the share apartment. It was like a band house, basically, with all these bands used to practice there. And he had this whole German childhood arranged, and he had all these little sounds and noises that he was recording for things like that, and these whole pile of these amazing old comics, Winsor McKay and all that sort of stuff, like just stacks of them. It was a goldmine. Seriously, I didn't have that much fun since I discovered a whole stack of manga at a youth hostel, literally a foot and a half of it at a next to the telephone of the youth hostel in Tasmania that someone put away, or the Orphan's Christmas I had, where I had a whole stack of 2000 AD comics, and I read every Judge Dredd in order, in sequence, uninterrupted from 1977 to 1988. So that's my background. So that's where I come from. It was good.
No.
But yeah, Max and Moritz. In fact, the Red Baron, I think his Max name is a reference to them, and he had a little dog who he called Moritz. It was apparently based off the characters. So it's like, calling your little dog Pluto in honor of Mickey Mouse whilst you're busy flying sorties in the First World War. Yeah. But the point is, this stuff, this idea of kids being innocent and pure and thing, I think really has come out of a number of panicky, paranoid, moral panics in places like the States where...
Well, shall we talk about the first one that makes a massive change for movies? The Hays Code. Was it 1934?
It's around that time. You can see the change clicking Hollywood movies.
And the pre-code and post-code, as far as animation goes, you could certainly see it. It becomes much more kid-friendly.
1934.
No,
it's more than just that. It's a whole moral agenda.
Absolutely. I mean, I really think we're still, to some degree, still living under its shadow at times. You see it come back in the 80s with family values.
Oh, you're seeing it coming back now with cancel culture. It's exactly the same. It's just got a new pretext. So
it's not, and it's not quite the same, but everything changes, but still very familiar at times.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We did screenings with the students once a week in our earlier semesters pre-COVID, and I'm kind of, someday in my copious free time, I might try and resurrect them. But it was very interesting looking at showing films from the 30s and showing films from the 40s. And the first thing you notice about all the film trailers in the 30s is that half of them, at least half of them, have female leads helming their own movie. Mae West, Gloria Swanston. There's a whole pile of Katie Hepburn. They're like big stars in their own right. By the time you get to the late 30s and 40s, it's all men, wall to wall. So the Hays Code wasn't just all the kids. It was it was a whole package, and it shut down a great ton of stuff. That's why we now have superheroes and old dad superheroes and talking ducks for like a good third of a century, half a century. It wasn't until people got fed up with it and make their own stuff.
The Hays Code was only 7 years old.
Oh, it went all the way up to, it was officially dropped in 1968.
When Fleischer was doing Superman. So that changed from those early films where they did have lead females, and then you've got Fleischer's Superman, where Lois Lane is relegated to. She's but she's quite a forceful character. She's very demanding and does her own thing, but it's always in a you woman sort of way. And
men don't have to look after them type bullshit.
Yeah, exactly that. Some interesting things in terms of the attitudes of female characters through that time period. Totally. We had Fleischer's Superman here on my list for what were we were talking about?
Because it is
propaganda.
But it is also a very adult, a more adult take on animation. Within the times, it's it's not a talking mouse. Cool.
No, it's definitely not in the vein of Disney stuff. And Fleischer went out of his way to be not Disney.
I think just about everybody who was not Disney went out of the way to look not Disney.
Yeah.
With a few exceptions, or one or two exceptions maybe, but Disney was just one of many.
Yeah, this is also probably the most adult take on from an animated version of this character till, or a superhero character till you hit Batman the Animated Series, which is 90s,
90s. Well, Bruce Timm is cited that he drew a lot of inspiration from Fleischer's Superman for the DCAU.
Oh, yeah. You can certainly see it in the Superman animated adventures.
Superman's design is very, very close to Fleisch's version. It's 90s and stylized, but that profile is exactly the same.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so definitely feels along those lines.
Man underpants.
You've got, because it's wartime as well, 1941, you've got propaganda animations that are being shown as part of newsreels, and people were going, and people engaging in animation, in a matinee screening of some sort during that time period. So, and Disney was doing it themselves. So things that are actually quite dark and hard to get, like Hitler's Children and De Fuhrer's Face. There are very much anti-Nazi propaganda coming out of Disney, and they're quite dark.
Yeah, it's not aimed at kids. That's aimed at the people that are going to see the films after that are going to possibly ship off the next day.
Yeah.
But a lot of the Warner Brothers stuff early Warner Brothers stuff is like that as well. And they're trading in all kinds of things. But yeah, Hays Code, and it wouldn't be the only one. There was the whole Comics Code Authority, which sort of took place around the same. Well, that was more 50s.
Which changes Superman again later on.
So you can see it. The States has a whole string of. There's a very strong paranoid streak running through the States, and I've always associated it with, to be honest, the Bible Belt, where they just cannot sit still if someone somewhere on the country is having a nice time, not following their precepts, and they just feel like they have to go to war with them, and before God's wrath ends us all. So it becomes an existential threat to them, and which is a bit of a shame, really. It's like that sort of puritanical streak. But a lot of that stuff, it's happened quite a few times. So when I look at the Tucker Carlsons of this world, they're just playing to that peanut gallery, really, and they're just doing it because they need ratings, because there's not much left of News Limited really to do that sort of stuff. In that particular case, they've
well,
a lot of people aren't subscribing to that stuff at all.
Looking at animation that is pre-Hays Code stuff, if you've got your Tex Avery's and your early Tom and Jerry's, which were quite violent, you've got Mickey Mouse, the bit of an asshole Mickey Mouse.
You've got Benny Lou, who's quite sexualized, yeah.
So there's sexuality-wise, there's totally Betty Boop. Yep. There's lots going on, and then the Nazis are defeated, and everything settles into a nice, peaceful era of being afraid of communists.
So we're brought up to 1951 now, and Animal Farm, possibly one of the few films funded by the CIA, apparently.
It was.
Seriously, funded by the CIA.
Yeah, it was. I remember that story doing the rounds when I was a kid in the 70s. Yeah, it was well known. But that was just like it was like one of those things you just heard about during the Cold War. If anything happened, and one side or the other took even the vaguest of interest in it for whatever reason, the opposite side would instantly panic and go full tilt into it, which would then cause the first lot to go, oh shit, we better do something, cut them off at the pass. So everything became a proxy in the Cold War. So if you look at the history of like mid-century, of 20th century, it's just filled with useless, pointless proxy wars. There were dozens in Asia and Africa and South America and Europe and all that sort of stuff. And it was everything got inflamed by this kind of unresolved meta conflict between two superpowers.
It's actually a really nice adaptation too, of the novel Animal Farm. I quite like both
it's a good one.
And the movie, even though it is not something kids would sit down and watch.
And this kind of sets a stage as well, because you do get a lot of animated adaptations of, let's call them young adult novels that are not really young adult novels, So we've got Watership Down in 78. We've got Plague Dogs in 82, 84? 82 was
terrible.
Early 80s.
Yeah, 82.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, those sort of things, which are just supposedly aimed at children's, but there's some graphic scenes in those and very adult concepts that are pitched well above a lot of children's heads at times. Certainly the younger kiddies.
Well, that was certainly the films that we all respected in primary school.
Yeah, no.
It's like this idea that we're all precious and delicate was kind of weird, especially after you've been brought up on World War II films.
True.
And it's weird when you go back to those old World War II films in the 70s. I mean, they're all played by middle-aged. All the main stars were getting old and puffy by that stage, like big old cushions, getting on a bit. But it's amazing when you watch those things again, like 30, 40 years later. It's like, jeepers. This feels like one of those animated propaganda things. You realise that 20 years later, it was still pretty hot stuff, pretty current.
Yeah, we were talking about another war at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with that trend towards extreme capitalism, that move into television, and our next slide, led to some adult programming in advertising, with of course kids aren't being marketed cigarettes. These are cigarettes for adults, and the adults were watching the Flintstones. Flintstones was a
first two seasons were sponsored.
Yeah, prime time comedy series. Hanna-Barbera pretty much took the Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason, and riffed on it, gave it a genre, and just threw it out there. And it's something that's been reused multiple times. So we got things like, The Simpsons, Family Guy, even other things along there. Wait until your father gets home.
1972, working on All in the Family as opposed to the Honeymooners, and kind of looking more at that generational difference, or that generational cultural difference between the father and the children.
But Wait Till Your Father Gets Home is kind of the reverse reaction to that. And there's actually a focus on the kids rebelling against their parents involved.
Yeah, true.
The part of that counterculture.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're still looking at 1972, primetime TV slot for a cartoon, and it got 3 seasons, so 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's almost forgotten about today, which is surprising.
Well, there's a lot of very short memories in media history. I mean, it's only in the last 20 that we've developed a long-term memory, and that's primarily because of the internet. People are now. I mean, I've got my own students, and people are just discovering stuff that I would never have had a chance to have discovered at their age without the internet. And so you watch something like Fantastic Planet, which is that weird old cardboard cutout almost. That kind of strange airbrushed film. I honestly thought I'd imagined the whole thing until about 15 years later when I discovered it on VHS. I thought, oh no, there it is. And,
I had to convince people that we were having monkeys dressed up as spies running around on roller skates was actually a form of entertainment in the 70s. And
which one's that?
Lancelot Luke's Secret Chimp.
God, I vaguely don't remember those.
All right.
You've got listed. We're talking about the counterculture period post that 50s period. So the 60s, you've got Yellow Submarine and the Beatles releasing their
counterculture.
Yeah, their films.
Yeah.
You've got 1001 Nights as Japanese film.
Yeah, 1969 Japanese film. It's very much adult erotica, but it's first X-rated film by beats Fritz Cats by 3 years, which is 1972.
Yeah.
And it's one of those films that actually spawned a trilogy. Did very well in Japan, not really that well known outside of Japan, and obviously it influenced Japanese anime, which will later on come and affect Western cartoon watching habits back in the late 70s, early 80s, when you're getting cartoons from over there redone for American audiences and released with English dubbing, and later on when you're getting Japanese releases of stuff through video markets in the late 80s. And
it was obviously not the first sexualized content, but it was definitely the first hentai sort of.
Yeah, it was one of the big ones there. And oddly enough, director Ishii Yamamoto, who's responsible for Space Battleship Yamamoto, which became Star Blazers. So,
Star Blazers.
And also worked in Kimber and Astro Boy as well. So,
Osaka. Yeah, very cool. So yes, speaking of which, have I? No, I've jumped.
That's Watership Down.
I've got things the wrong way around. Look at that. Slides the wrong way around. There we go. So, Fritz the Cat, which is essentially Ralph Bakshi, who was an animator on the 60s Spider-Man series, and was doing big things then. Goes out and he went out with the intention of being anti-Disney and just real counterculture, and he was pushing the limits, and he crossed the line a few times in several ways.
Yeah,
quite a few ways actually. But anyway,
yeah,
we probably should dedicate an episode to him.
I think so.
I would love to. Like, he's quite an inspirational person to hear him talk about inspiring young animators, because he does go, if you've got a pencil and a camera and you've got the willingness to draw, why are you not making films right now? And I love that quote from him. It's like he loves the craft. Yeah, he he gets a little bit weird sometimes, and there's some awesome shortcuts, and he does things on the cheap, and he makes some clever choices to do things on the cheap. But it's his stuff is really, really worth seeing.
I reckon we could do a whole episode on the influence of Mighty Mouse, early 80s, or was it late 80s? And all the people that participated on that went on to pretty much reinvent American animation on things like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network.
Okay, I'll be interested.
Yeah, and the credit list, I think, on Mighty Mouse is pretty impressive.
A conversation later on down the track. So
I think so. It might be worth having a look at.
Yeah,
especially if we've got ambitions of building an industry here.
It's animation.
Yeah, definitely.
So go on, say.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Bakshi's work is going across 3 decades, 70s, 80s, 90s at least, and he's pushing the envelope pretty much in all those decades to some degree, releasing what is fairly adult-minded animation.
Absolutely adult-minded. I think his most recent film was The Last Days of Coney Island. I don't know what year that was. I think 2012. Hold on, let me just check the date on that. Days of Coney Island, 2015.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's still out there doing stuff. And he's always throwing stuff out there. He definitely is in it for the money. Quite often you can find him on eBay selling his old film cells.
Well, got to declutter the house. Jeez.
So if you want an obscure Fritz the Cat animated boob scene, you could probably pick it up on eBay at some point.
Excellent. I'm sure there's a queue around the block for that one.
Yeah, you'd find there is. There's not so much Fritz the Cat, but definitely Fire and Ice and Wizards, and of course Lord of the Rings gets a lot of traction.
Oh, what Cool World doesn't get a mention? Oh,
Cool World does, purely because of Hollywood. No, Kim
for sure.
Basinger does character. So, yeah. Okay, so around that time, you've got it's crossing into surrealism. So you've got things like Fantastic Planet and Rene Laloux.
Yep. So French animated film. It just it's a piece of beauty. It really is.
Well, you got things like there's an Italian film called Allegro non troppo, which I think came out in 1978, 1979, and that was a complete take on Disney's Fantasia.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very Italian humor, shall we say, especially of the 70s, and it's everything from ribald humor to political and social commentary, really.
Yeah. Bolero with
Firebird done with a strong anti-capitalist bent. It's kind of cool. But
I wouldn't say that it's a reaction to Disney's Fantasia, because Fantasia was Disney expressing himself in the best way that Disney could.
And
Disney's first love was classical music,
mm-hmm.
not the animation. He was a studio manager for an animation studio. He loved classical music, and the reason we got Fantasia and the reason we got Silly Symphonies and a lot of those classically timed animations and the Warner Brothers riffs off that later on is because Disney loved the music, whereas Allegro non troppo is really it's the Italian sense of humor, yes, and he's really pushing against that Disney thing. But
it's very much magazine cartoonists making a film. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. True.
Kind of fun.
What a shit.
Oh yeah. Gotta say, the 1978 is a bit of a classic. I still reckon the staging and the setup in that works far better than the animation.
There's something, and Dave and I can talk to this because we actually watched something with really slow pacing over the weekend. But the whole idea of a lot of these films, especially like Watership Down, are really, really slow pacing and slow build up to extreme violent scenes. Is something that people do in thrillers. Not as much these days because it tends to be slasher jump scares, but that build up of tension. And then
you've definitely got a genre of horror that's got all about the slow burn, and this actually fits well in with that. I mean, graphic violence is really not expected.
I think I was like 8 years old when I first saw Watership Down, and I kind of think that it's, and I'm going to get crucified for saying so, but I think it's a film that should still be shown to 8-year-olds, kind of.
Absolutely.
Just to give that whole idea of this is the reality of life, and things are violent and bad things sometimes happen, but life continues.
Rabbits spend every waking minute being alert because they could get killed at any waking minute. That was the thing I took home from it. I was like, wow, okay.
This is where we get a whole bunch of text messages going, "Okay, boomer," coming through. I think.
So you're trying to encourage resilience. This movie is all about resilience, then, for you watching.
Yes,
this.
It is.
It is. It's also a political allegory, 70s style as well.
Yeah,
it's there's. I don't. People would talk about it in terms of desensitization. I don't think it's desensitization because it's still a horrible thing for me to watch. But
absolutely,
it's actually it's putting you in that mindset. Yeah, horrible things can happen, but there is still positivity and a community that can grow around these horrible things that happen. And I think Watership Down does that best. Something that the modern adaptation adaptations haven't got at all. That idea of growing out of trauma.
I got to admit, this did terrify me as a kid. Absolutely, just the picture book for it alone. I remember at school, just a cat pinning one of the rabbits there. And it's just like, oh, that's a thing of nightmares.
And you think, oh yeah, that's what cats do. I've heard about cats doing this. There's a picture of one doing it.
Haunting soundtrack, main theme by Simon and Garfunkel that is very much within that theme.
And became a hit at the time, like the solid #1 for a couple of weeks, I believe.
It was actually Bright Eyes, yeah.
And then we go into the Plague Dogs, which is the same thing, but pushes it even further.
Boy, oh boy, that's something I even have trouble with. It's just getting through.
A lot of people know Watership Down because of its notoriety, and it does get shown to children. Plague Dogs is along the same lines, but doesn't often get shown to children. So you've got
it's more nihilistic.
A group of dogs that escape a lab, and they're all infected with some sort of disease. And basically, the film is a bunch of scientists and hunters going out after them as the dogs make their way to freedom.
Like I say, it doesn't end well. That's the only spoiler you're getting.
Yeah, so it's tortured animals, and sort of the last days of a group of dogs. It's pretty dark. Yeah.
So people carry on about the never-ending story and the horse that gets buried in the pits of despair.
Yeah.
Despair.
No, the thing is, you remember that 3 decades later because there's a salient message in that. Like, it's like you're not automatically going to make through it. You've got to get through to the other side, really. And it's a struggle all the way. Yeah. But this sort of stuff, I mean, even old family movies usually had some catastrophe at the end of them. Like you go and watch, say, like The Fox and the Hound would be the last of that sort of genre. But even things like Lassie and all those live action films from the 50s and 60s.
You'd see some little, big one.
You'd see some little kid whittling away with a freaking Bowie knife. It's like no one's worried about losing a few fingertips or an eyeball on that one. But there'd always be some moment where they have some death event or some dark, stormy bit at the end of the film, and there's tears and stuff, and they come out the other side. And it wasn't until I saw one of those films again that I realized, that stuff used to be in everything, and now it's not in anything. Really,
even kids' novels at the time, like Bridge to Terabithia, and some of that.
Well, we're about to hit sort of the start of that because the 80s, and looking at cartoons in the 80s, and they weren't allowed to show death. They weren't allowed to show. The G.I. Joe lasers were firing lasers at people, and the A-Team rolls, and people get out of the car afterwards. Because
we had a very, shall we say, moralistic crowd in power. So they were all for Second Amendment, and they were all for violence, and they were all for strength is might, and all that. Right is might. Might is right. And the thing is, all those cartoons were selling goods to children. They were selling toys to children.
Exactly.
Under the guise of action. It's like the A-Team had the same controversy. They were doing all kinds of stupid things with rocket launchers, but oh no, it's action.
Animation companies, toy companies realized very soon after Star Wars that you could market the crap out of a whole bunch of toys as merchandise for a film, and use it as a half an hour advertisement during the 80s.
That's pretty much it.
And these dolls, which were kind of violent barbarians and stuff like that, He-Man had little moral lessons at the end of the episode where He-Man told you
token gestures. Yeah, but I think Tanya and I have had a few arguments about. I'm not a big fan of the old Transformers or the 80s cartoons because I came out of the 70s expecting some good things to come out, like after Watership Down and all that sort of stuff, and then suddenly it just became, all toy lines. Like every single one of them is a freaking toy line. It's half an hour of toy line, and it's animation for the toy line, but it's not animation.
Honestly, the only Transformers stuff that I own are toys. I don't own any of the movies or the animation.
No, it was like, I think one of the first things that the Reagan administration did when it came to power was it relaxed the rules on advertising to kids, and the floodgates opened, and suddenly pretty much all the animation in the 80s, at least on television at least, was essentially advertising. and it was just there to sell toys. The fact that there was an animated bunch of characters was almost incidental. And so I never got into the 80s animation until like early 90s, really, which was the liquid television era.
Yep.
And the video.
For the 80s, though, you get Japanese animation being brought over to American audiences.
True. That is true.
And that's where you're looking at them being cut down, stories changed, themes being lost that are much more adult. And watered down for American and Australian and
Sandy Frank taking Gatchaman and gutting it, and then putting Seven Zark 7 on in Center Neptune to fill space that they'd cut out of violent and sex scenes from Gatchaman, which we knew as G-Force.
So
you'll find into Robotech and the Roy Forker coffee table slump, where he's injured, not dead, he's just injured and never seen again throughout the entire of the series.
But you can see, I mean, it's not like, people don't take animation seriously. I think you'll find that the Americans don't take animation seriously, even though they all but invented it. And you can, I see comparisons between how anime is received as this fantastic thing and how, international animation is really well received, whilst at the same time, well, not so much with streaming, but at the same time, American animation is so stilted. But I'm talking 80s and 90s now. I'm not talking the last century. This century, sorry, it's a completely different story. But you can see, even during the Hays Code, there was this explosion of interest in foreign films, like the Japanese samurai films in the mid 50s, like Seven Samurai and Yojimbo and that. And then there was also the Nordic noir, if you like, the Seventh Seal and Ingmar Bergman and all that sort of crowd. So people still got their hit of grown-up stuff for movies without all that kind of stuffy, stunted sort of American drama that we were kind of subjected to with Hays Codes and separate beds and all that sort of stuff. So I see comparisons where people still got the stuff. And I think arguably when movies did free up in the States, people got less interested in foreign films, because the local stuff was more than filling the market. Like you look at all the 70s and late 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
How many foreign films made it through that? They had foreign directors end up joining Hollywood because that was the only game in town at that point. You
still got a fair few. You had your Zeffirellis.
Oh, for sure. But they were relegated to the art circuit by comparison.
Yeah.
It's not like Kurosawa turns up in the mid-50s and suddenly the entire earth moves for everybody. And suddenly half the movies and westerns are totally inspired by him. I mean, if you look at all the spaghetti westerns, they're pretty much all the Japanese films word for word, action for action. So,
mind you, he reckons he made more out of Fistful of Dollars than he did out of Yojimbo. So,
it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Did he end up
Well, there was a big legal battle over it. Real case of plagiarism. Yeah.
That's very cool.
Whereas Magnificent Seven just went, we're gonna adapt your movie.
And then change the name so that you've tried to, so we can block you. Yeah, I heard that one too in the 80s as well. So I saw Seven Samurai first and was utterly blown away by it. I was completely unprepared for it. And then when I saw the Magnificent Seven, it felt like a pale imitation. But most people I knew had seen the Magnificent Seven first. I thought it was amazing. And it's like, oh, okay. But it's funny how that all works. And it's funny how that stuff still continues now. It's been cycling around doing these sort of little cycles. So moral panics, cancel culture, all that stuff, nothing new, kids. It's been around in just about every form you can imagine. And it's been on and off constantly for at least a century and definitely beyond.
It's a cycle.
It's very cyclic. So we've currently got the new bunch going through it right now. So if you're looking at Fox News and thinking the civilization's about to end, no, probably not. But it's certainly frustrating.
There's other things that might, But anyway, so end of the 80s. Let's hit 1988, and don't think we're going to make our talk to the Groeningverse in this hour, unfortunately.
We can sort of introduce the idea.
1990s, The Simpsons, pretty much.
1988, we've got Akira as far as animation goes, and we've got The Simpsons premiering, and it's it's one of a range of couple of more adult animations that came out at the time. Because you've also got Capital Critters, and there's one other that I'm missing in 1988. And it could have been any of those, but The Simpsons came out, and Fox was starting network at the time, and that was the first thing that really hit for them, and they ran with it. And still running with it.
They were experimenting. Well, a lot of shows, because the sitcom had been done through the 50s through the 70s to the 80s. And it was pretty
kind of had another bloom in the 80s.
They were doing some weird stuff with sitcoms in the 80s. So you had the one where the little girl was a robot, and you had the sitcom where, well, Alf.
Yeah,
it's just a regular family with an alien that lives in the house. You've got what other weird comedies you had during that time? Obviously, earlier than that, you had My Favorite Martian.
Yeah, and My Mother-in-Law's a Car. But it's just one of those things. You get the cycle of the sitcom. You get the traditional ones taking more sort of money there, and then towards the end, you'll get the occasional weird one actually blossoming as a hit momentarily, and that's kind of where we were in that period of the 80s. The main sitcom had pretty much played out. We'd gone to the weird sitcoms with, as you say, Alf, Mork and Mindy, things like that, and they're starting to play out. So,
and that I think that occurrence is what gave Simpsons the leap into primetime again, because animation hadn't really been in primetime.
I think that was part of the reason. Yeah, definitely. It's one of those lightning in a bowl. There's a lot of different factors lining up perfectly for The Simpsons.
Yes,
but also the way they put it together was pretty well put together as well. The way that they were able to develop an episode over a 9-month period and just overlap these things was a really amazing thing. I remember reading it as an animation student, and I was it just got better and better as I read through the whole article, and I couldn't wait to get to see it. Yeah. And
it had also kind of gone through its teething problems already in short format for the Tracy Ullman show. So you've got that designer aspect, so it's coming to TV relatively fully formed.
Around that time, sorry, I've jumped ahead a slide, but so you've got The Simpsons on TV, and then you've got the importing, and I think although I had dealt with Gigantor and Speed Racer and later things like Robotech, which was Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, and Gaichiman, which is Japanese animation I've had experience with, and Astro Boy. I think it really hit me that the Japanese were not just attempting to emulate America when Akira came out, because
they were charting their own
amazingly designed and stylized films coming out. So Akira, and then you have
Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost in the Shell not long afterward.
But even before that, you got Wings of Honorius, which is fantastic to look at.
Yeah. You've got what's that one?
I haven't even mentioned the Ghibli films, which add to a variety of different ages. You wouldn't say Grave of the Fireflies is a kid's film.
Oh, God.
No, you could. It works on the same level of Watership Down.
Yeah.
Resilience. Yeah.
We had to go through our Holocaust films and classes in primary school. No one batted an eyelid to that stuff. And, I'd seen bits of that from various TV shows over the years before that, but I was startled at the number of my fellow kids, my fellow friends who didn't know a single thing about it. I was really surprised. And
My Neighbor Totoro in 1998 as well, from Frank G.
Well, that's considered the ultimate classic kids show, really, that one. And I think it's almost like, it's when I see attitudes like that at the Oscars, I'm not really that surprised, but for a lot of people, they don't pay much attention to the culture that they're in until they feel they're losing it.
I think
they don't go around helping to maintain it either. That
maturity that we're talking about in terms of foreign films coming in is probably the reason why people are latching on to these films, aside from being immensely awesome crafted films.
And you had availability as well, because it was the video revolution, so these were being actually available in Western video stores, so you could see that you could go in and see these things. You weren't reliant on commercial TV.
You weren't being curated by distributors or exhibition chains. VHS definitely saved a lot of films.
Frank's saying the Iron Giant was at the same time as Totoro, and you look at the Iron Giant and Brad Bird, it is Brad Bird,
Yep, that's definitely him.
So, Brad Bird was, he'd come out of doing things for other people, and the whole idea of The Simpsons, the whole idea of pushing a film that was competing. Yes, that is Persepolis. I actually haven't seen Persepolis, so that is my black curtain on this list. I do need to see it.
It's a good one.
It is on my.
I think I showed it to our students about 5 years ago, or 6 years ago now. God, long time.
But you look at the strength of Brad Bird's films as a visual storyteller, and I think that's where Brad, without going into specific directors and that sort of thing, but Brad Bird definitely exists within that realm of animation, because he is such a visual storyteller. It's all about the action that you see and the emotions that you're pulling out of the screen. Yeah.
All right. So that's what the 80s, 90s. We're seeing further explosion of anime. So you've got things like carrying on from Akira in 88. You've got going through to Neon Genesis in 95. You've got a lot more anime making its way to the West. It's being dubbed wholesale. It's being screened on US channels like Toonami without any sort of massive alterations as it was in the 80s.
They're a lot cleaner than they were, but they're also not cherry picking the best of the best stuff.
No, not necessarily. No, you've got a lot of toyetic cartoons doing their rounds as well, like Pokemon. But you've got
Pokemon's
Gundam,
a whole different category.
Yeah, you've got Gundam making its way across to the States with Gundam Wing, which I'm always popular too. I always love the giant robot genre. So yeah.
I think we also missed something as well. I think we've missed all the video clip animation that came out.
We did, and we missed mentioning The Wall as well, 82.
Oh, yes. Alan Parker's film.
True.
Yeah. So a lot of that stuff was, video clips became sort of invented late 70s. There'd always been people shooting live performances. But the video clip as a form, as a
MTV.
standalone form, appeared in the late 70s, and then when MTV really hit its stride, it just exploded, and there was this huge creative explosion of really interesting stuff. A lot of designers cutting their teeth on that sort of stuff. So you see lots of rotoscoping, lots of really interesting arty animations, like people really getting experimental in all the right ways. And so that sort of stream and thread kept going. So it started appearing as sort of, I guess you could say, late night art house. Juvenile, is that the word I'm after? Yeah. Television, like liquid television, where it sort of started to mature and become quite esoteric.
Things that would turn into Adult Swim on Cartoon Network in the noughties.
Leon Flux coming out of that and then dying a horrible death to Charlize Theron movie, but yeah.
I was amazed they developed it in the first place.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And also along the same lines as The Simpsons, definitely aiming to be more controversial. From the outset to be more controversial was South Park, being rather shoddily thrown together animation, but written to the nth degree, is still going, pretty strong as well. You're in the 25th season of South Park now.
Still not pulling any punches. I'm amazed they've made it last this long.
Yeah,
it's pretty impressive. It's got a very Bakshi style to it. But
a lot of those Adult Swim cartoons sort of fell by the wayside. A lot of them ended up being a little bit weird and surreal, riffing off other things. You've got Harvey Birdman and Space Ghost Coast to Coast and Aqua Teen Hunger Force. There's some gems in there, like the Venture Brothers.
I still think Harvey Birdman stands up quite well. If you've ever worked in an office, it really does sing to you.
It was the Office before the Office. Yeah,
pretty
much. Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
You've got things that appear in the Simpsons clones, like Family Guy, which it says it's its own thing, but it is totally a Simpsons clone.
I wonder if some of that attitude to animation being childish boils down to a lot of Adult Swim stuff's quite juvenile. Like it's very much it draws heavily on sex and violence to get its adult rating, and I could see that colouring. People brought up on childish cartoons end up just doing juvenile cartoons when they grow up.
For every Aeon Flux, there was a zillion small animations that for every good animation you had 4 or 5 that just ended up being silly and childish in some ways.
But I guess at the other side of the coin, which we haven't really discussed, is that we are in an era where things are often aimed at two-tier. You'll get stuff that will appeal to the adults as much as it appeals to the children, and is saying complex things on both sides of the coin. So things like Steven Universe, which is definitely LGBTQI friendly, and is having that conversation and gay conversation and a trans conversation and an acceptance and representation conversation at a child level and at an adult level. And it's amazing to see that. Centaur World, dealing with post-traumatic stress on its characters in amongst the fart jokes, is phenomenal to see.
And Bench Time.
Yep.
As well, along those lines. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Copped a lot of flack because it wasn't. Let's not go into the sordid realm of reboots, but the new version definitely delved into those concepts and did them better.
Yeah, I think so. I'd be inclined to watch She-Ra over He-Man any day.
Even the original, one of the main runners was J. Michael Straczynski, and he.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and in a lot of his letters to the editor, you can find them online, where he's talking about, in season 2, She-Ra gets tied up like 4 times and has to be rescued 5 times. She's the hero of the show. Why are you doing this? Yeah. So he definitely.
She-Ra.
That's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
Then we get to the 90s.
We've gone.
Persepolis is 2000s, 2007.
Well, I was just thinking the 90s are well regarded as a highlight of television.
Oh, yeah.
Everything from, for kids, the Daffy and hyperkinetic SpongeBob. Was it Ed, and Eddie, and Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls? There was quite a great bit of stuff coming out of that.
That's sort of the beginning of that return of the double-layered animations. Like I was an adult when Powerpuff Girls came out, and I just fell in love with the style and the quick and punchy writing.
It's really cool.
And it's definitely a kids show, but some clever. Like I think Mojo Jojo is one of the greatest bad guys, villains of all time.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Mojo Jojo. But yes, I'm a fan of 60s Batman, so that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the villains were quite out there. They were good.
Along those lines.
I saw the reboot of Powerpuff Girls, and it's definitely lacking something. It's not Chemical X. I think it's Chemical Y or W. V or something. It's not the full
Yes.
X, that's for sure.
True.
Yeah, it's just missing an edge or something. It's just like it's going through the motions, but it's lacking something.
So since streaming has come along, we're in kind of a golden age of adult animation.
Well, until this morning when Netflix self-destructed. So.
Well, yeah, closing down their animation departments is kind of sad, and we're hoping they build back up again. Especially you've got things like recently Arcane, which is I took a long time to come around to it because it was machinima, and my experience of machinima pretty much was me headbutting against Red versus Blue and Ruby, and I'm sure there'll be people who crucify me for saying
we just dissed half our students from 3 years ago. Come on.
Yeah, that's true. Ruby fans.
Well, a lot of Ruby fans wanted to become animators, I'll have you know.
That's true. It's
and a couple of years before that, it was all the people watching, was it Star Wars Rebels? Or was it Star Wars, which one was it?
Clone Wars.
So many Clone Wars, thank you.
Yeah.
There are so many Star Wars cartoons now. But we had a whole pile of people come through with that. Then we had a whole, before that, back in the mists of time, we had a whole pile of female animators, I might add, who came in because of Oblivion. Not Oblivion? The other one. Oh, God, don't play these games, and I really must do my homework. What's the one after Oblivion? The dragon slaying game. I've just drawn a blank because I'm an old and I've got a head like
Skyrim, you mean?
Skyrim, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
There was a whole pile of, we had a whole influx, like half our students that were female came in because of Skyrim. And they were all wanting to make helmets with upside down horns and stuff like that, and, like in 3D and build swords and all that sort of stuff. And they ended up coming. We had a couple of really good animators and good students come through with that lot.
I have to admit, when it came to Arcane, I was really railing against it. And when I saw the first few episodes, because it takes me a little bit to settle into watching animation series, because I'm generally picking it apart and trying to work out how they're doing stuff and what the techniques are. It's the curse of knowing how animation works.
Knowing how the sausages is made, it can often be a terrible experience.
But it's so cleverly done. They take some. I was talking about Ralph Bakshi's shortcuts earlier, that whole idea of things that you can do. They're using game tricks to produce really fantastically realized scenes. The texture work is amazing, and it's not reliant. The animation is not really reliant on the texture work. It's just
although it's kind of a bit of a cliche story in some ways, but when it does drop those story beats and those emotional story beats, it's just well executed, and they'll often be tied in with the action beats as well, and it's just nice symmetry there.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's I've seen the first episode. The beginning, it was like, okay, over the top Spider-Man action. I'm starting to nod off a bit. It's like I've only seen this about 3,000 times in cutscenes, and then
episode 3 shakes it up a lot.
Definitely getting better. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on it.
So if Arcane is kind of the big thing recently, like what upcoming is big and more avant-garde or more technically interesting? Obviously, Into the Spider-Verse 2, but that's carrying on from the previous film. Is there anything that's out there that's looking like it's pushing the limits?
I would have thought some of the Netflix films that we saw or we talked about last session.
Well, I would have loved to have seen Bone, but that got cancelled, unfortunately.
Is it off the old comic?
Yeah, the old old indie comic.
Ancient comic.
Yeah, we're cropped. We can't see your bone action figure in the background.
Oh, damn. Well, it's just hanging up there.
There you go.
Find the right way. So, yep, stupid Great Creature is there. So, yep.
Crikey.
Yeah.
Made sure and shot.
Nice.
But there's definitely animation that's interesting coming. I'm just reading through
next month. We've got I know movies wise we've got Pinocchio, A True Story, which is coming out middle of the next month. We've also got Bob's Burgers movie coming out the end of next month.
Yes.
I think that might be it for animated movies per se. Obviously, for special effects heavy movies, we've got Multiverse of Madness just about to drop. So
that's gonna really haven't mentioned Sin City as a precursor to Spider-Verse. Would you say?
Sin City, really? That's a long road to pull.
No, it's.
Sin City was just highly designed.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Frank.
I think someone's noted that both films have a lot of high degree of stylized design work in it, and I just assumed that they were related. I'd be very. That's a.
But it also does break up. It does follow that sort of breaking up in comic panel screens.
Yeah.
Of the film.
That's nothing unusual.
That's
Ang Lee did it with the Hulk, and everyone thought it was crap. So what's the point?
True.
People are too selective and busy building fan theories.
So
it's so things like Sin City and 300, and then so Frank's talking about a graphic novel aesthetic, I suppose. I think Spider-Verse has that element, but I think where Spider-Verse works is that it is not trying to work within those constraints. It's taking those constraints and going, what can we do to push it to the next level?
Exactly. It's like old-fashioned filmmaking.
Yeah, it's
they use their limitations as a springboard, not as a
it is. I can see the relationship now. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So in terms of that graphic novel origin and that style, absolutely. The Heretic made in the Unity game engine is the future. I haven't seen that. I'm gonna have to.
There's a lot of.
Look at this. We're all shaking our heads.
That's
animation. What's that?
So send us the link, Frank. We want to see it.
Oh dear.
So we're curious now. We're
prepared.
Don't forget, yes. I was looking at my list of things. So I definitely want. See, we keep putting off the whole idea of tearing apart the Groeningverse, and I know it. Next time. So we got The Bad Guys is out and is apparently all right. Everyone I have.
It outperformed Morbius, knocked Morbius off its perch in America. So,
it sounds like that wasn't too hard of a challenge.
Yeah, probably done that. Truth be told,
you've seen Fantastic Beasts 3. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is out.
I've somehow managed to miss Sonic the Hedgehogs 1 and 2 and Fantastic Beasts 1, 2, and 3.
Sonic's quite fun. It's not anything amazing. It's just, but it doesn't. Remember when the first animation previews of Sonic the Hedgehog came out a couple of years ago?
Oh, that's right.
And the world
howled with anguish and just cries of despair. It's like, there was global warming too, but that was minor compared to that little outburst.
Yes,
I think we've heard this way too many times as lecturers, Tanya. My childhood. I was like, oh God, again. was it this time? 2010? Are we up to that yet? Or was it 2000?
It's really sad when the students start talking about, you know, the golden age of animation being 10 years ago.
Well, we all think that when we're younger, don't we?
Apollo 10.5 is on Netflix.
Like, I'm
It's
an old
online.
Doctor Who
Yeah,
fan.
actually,
Everyone knows
not
Doctor Who
seen
was in
that
its
yet.
golden age when Tom Baker was there. Obvious.
Ooh.
It's the same with
Mandalorian.
dance music. It's the same with television. The same with animation.
Look, see,
Yeah.
Frank's throwing all this stuff. We should invite Frank to chat.
Yeah, Frank, man.
We should hang him upside down on the dungeon wall
Yeah.
and hit him and see if he still maintains his views.
Yes.
All right.
He can stop being an ambient listener throwing us things and actually say his piece.
He can stop being a backseat driver. Oh, geez. So, yeah.
But Apollo 10.5 is something I want to see because it's popping up on
That
the
looks
radar.
interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that meant to be autobiography? Is that a rotoscope autobiography thing? I've only just quickly looked at the Netflix preview. It looks interesting. Actually, there's been a couple of interesting. Even the regular nerdy style animations have been sort of vaguely interesting. Most of them. So the general quality of animation has generally gone up over time with streaming. I mean, even Disney's making wild and woolly stuff with like Gravity Falls. I mean, that just looks like a classic.
Oh, that's
going to be
amazing.
around for like.
Likes being in the chat, says Frank.
Oh, God, fan service. Seriously. Well, we've got our one fan, so we're doing well. So let's preserve it.
Have someone who views. Well, Frank was teaching animation in Brisbane. Is that right, Frank? So a few years ago, before moving to WA. So
cool. Should drag him into Joondalup and get him to do some hours there.
Yeah. That'd put us all out of a job. We don't want to say that, no.
We'll have to work in industry, won't we?
Yeah. You know what? Flex. Yeah.
That could work.
Yes, true.
Oh, I just think a universe with no marking in it. Oh.
He's a lecturer at Curtin.
Lecturer at Curtin? Oh, he's an academic lecturer. Sorry. We're a bit vocational down this neck of the woods. Yeah.
Should we say something about Curtin in the fact that you've misspelled Curtin?
Curtin?
Typos allowed.
Typos are okay.
I'm not going there.
But yes. So we're looking forward to the TAFE students competing against the Curtin students at some point down the track. Yeah.
Oh, we'll see how we go.
3:30 animation competition. Yeah.
Something like a little trash talk to mobilize people.
Yes. I'm a big fan of trash talk. It never goes well for me. I always end up wearing it. It's the worst. But I love trash. Yeah, 8 years. Yeah, so 8 years at Brisbane TAFE. So
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Very good, Frank. Well done, mate. You're in safe hands. Curtin's pretty good. It used to be a vocational college itself before it got all uppity and became a university. So I studied there shortly after Wait. Western Australian Institute of Technology became Curtin.
Yes.
Or cut. Right at the time when we were starting to cut university funding.
Anyway,
technology, yes.
We've crossed into rambling and gossiping with
We
people.
certainly have, so that's probably
We certainly have to wind this up.
So
I'm starting to nod off here.
let's wind it all up and get us going.
Perhaps an executive summary of our discussion for those who've made it this far.
Travis and I are discussing, so you guys don't see Travis. Travis doesn't like to be on the screen, but he's probably watching us right now and has a lot of comments later on. But Travis and I have been discussing topics for upcoming episodes of Lightbox, and he's got a big plan. So hopefully we see that come to fruition within the next couple of episodes, and that's going to be very, very interesting.
And eventually a discussion of the Groeningverse.
Eventually, because I do I do want to explain my point of view, and I know that it is kind of a troll on my part, but I do really want to go into this and explain. Yes, I won't spoil it because it's going to be fun to argue that one. I really want a lot of people in the chat arguing with me over that one. Yeah.
It's probably because she's a narcissist.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. So that a little bit of a narcissist, a little bit of a masochist, and that.
Yes. So I guess to summarize, we've really been talking about animation in terms of it being an adult medium.
Yeah. Yes.
And
that was the purpose of today's chat.
Yes. So it was partly sparked by the banter at the Academy Awards. I think that was pre-slap, I believe, that episode, part of the Academy Awards.
Was it? Yeah, it would have been pre-slap.
Pretty much making fun without realizing it of animation just being for kids. Ironically, while someone being nominated for one of those animated awards had just made an animated documentary of a very adult subject. So it went down very well. But the thing is, that whole idea that animation's made for these kind of innocent little kiddywinks is a bit of a misnomer, really.
Yeah.
And if you look back at old stuff for kids, like Max and Moritz and the Cassette Jammer Kids and, all that old stuff, Ginger Megs even, they were anything but angelic. In fact, most of the child heroes in comics were larrikins, and they were vandals, and they played pranks, and they got into trouble, and often had horrible demises. And even the early Disney characters, like in the 20s and 30s, like the Silly Symphonies and the, Mickey Mouse is a bit of a trickster. Donald Duck wears a sailor suit because he was actually in the Navy, I believe, not because he was a weird duck. But all that stuff, it wasn't until things like the Hays Code kicked in and the first moral panics kicked in. And there was this idea that children had to be protected from themselves, where in earlier days, children were actually a menace to society and were treated as such by all the adults. So there was this very strong, almost punitive moralizing streak in kids' literature, the classic, the almost itchy and scratchy level moralizing, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So this idea that it's a kids thing where, everyone's watching Bluey or Sea Time television or whatever the hell it is sort of a misnomer. And it's sort of been plastered right across the board, where in actual fact, it hasn't been. It's been a mixture of everything. And it's been like that for the duration of animation, essentially, in filmmaking.
We've always had those only a few exceptions of storytelling, as Frank's just saying there. And those that would use it to express things that they didn't have the budget for in other mediums.
Absolutely. There have only been episodes where we have stopped it being an adult medium, and that's usually with areas of moral panic, many of which I think come from the States. And so we're going through, you'll probably find there's a mixture of that stuff happening right now, except it's not, since we don't have mass culture like we used to. And for those who aren't familiar with that term, mass culture is a pre-internet term where everyone was sort of on the same page culturally. Like if you talked about a mainstream, there really was a mainstream. You'd watch television one evening, and then the following day, all the people in your neighborhood, all the people in your school, even the grown-ups would be talking about what they saw on television, because there was only like 2 or 3 channels, and that was about it. Now with the internet and even VHS, it atomized completely. There's no such thing as a sort of mainstream. There's like thousands and thousands and thousands of live, perpetually alert and perpetually active little, I don't want to call them fiefdoms, but little social circles where people obsess about something. It might be something like an old Jerry Anderson cartoon, or it might be, an old Jerry Anderson show, or the Golden Girls, or whatever the hell it is. But it's still alive and it's still current and it's at your fingertips. So if I talk to anything about anything to anybody, they can just look it up on Google, and
there it is. That zeitgeist right there.
It's not found in some dusty old antique shop thinking, gee, what the hell's this, Grandma? It's alive and well and still going. And that's the big difference, and that's the great thing about the modern age. So when you do get moral panics, they're relegated to this kind of noisy chapter or noisy channel on the Culture War Reddit that everyone else can kind of avoid and get around. Whereas in the dark old days of mass culture, there was no escape from it. If some bunch of Wallies had a bit of a meltdown in the state somewhere, we'd be feeling it, and there would be no question that you'd be feeling it. Like, for example,
suddenly Superman and Batman couldn't beat on villains; they had to go into space or fight aliens or something.
That's right. So with Mary Whitehouse, she was supposed to be this great moral crusader representing a whole pile of people. Turned out she was a moral crusader of one person representing herself, and she didn't like something, so fuck everyone else, basically. And that's essentially how a lot of these moral panics take place. It's a lot of paranoia and fear, and a lot of anxiety and a sense of loss or potential loss that drives a lot of stuff.
As a final question for you two about that, is animation targeted by that for any particular reason?
I don't think it. That's assuming that it's the only thing that's being targeted. Comics were definitely on the nose in the 50s with the Moral Crusaders. In fact, rock and roll music was on the nose in the 1950s. And if you look at rock and roll music, it's secular religious music.
There's sort of kickback for that as well, the rap movement and the labeling of albums.
Hey, I know who Kevin Bacon is. I watch Footloose.
But the point is that there have been moral panics non-stop. They're ongoing. There was, I think I might have mentioned this before to somebody, I can't remember where, but there was, when I was studying at Curtin back in the 80s, take note, Frank, we were going through children and television as a subject. And we were working through the 20th century panics. And even in Britain, they had a big panic about crooners. How they were kind of driving women crazy, and there was all this American, it's not us type thing, our culture's under attack, because the whole music hall Brighton Beach style where everyone gets in there and, sings to the back room or, does the old have a banana routine with the yokels. Suddenly they're confronted by all this American technology where microphones and speakers allow someone like Frank Sinatra to silence a music hall by singing quietly into a microphone, like one-on-one, with almost like intimate in a bedroom, and everyone right at the back can hear it. And that completely changed the whole demographic of how music was played. Now you might think that's pretty minor, and it sort of is in our day and age, but at the time it felt like a real attack on I guess British culture, in the same way that Anzacs had fights with the US soldiers in the Second World War. They felt they were being taken over. And that sort of stuff, it's constantly bubbling away all through. The
Battle of Brisbane. If you don't know about it, look it up. It's awesome.
Look it up. It's interesting. And so these sort of things go on all the time. Something new comes in. Was it Terry Pratchett was saying, or was it Hitchhiker's Guide? Douglas Adams. He was saying things like, when you're 15, any crazy inventions are just a natural way of things, and then by the time you're 35, it's a radical new development coming across a new discovery.
It sounds like it could be even. I don't know.
If you're over 35, it's an affront.
There's a lot of crossover, like Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett. But
the point is, what you grow up with is what you assume to be normal. Yeah. And yet, looking as I got to know my parents and my grandparents before they passed away, or some of them passed away, you become apparent that the world I lived in 3 years after all this stuff was going down when I was born, or just a few years before that, was quite different to what I was used to. So I thought it was just normal and had been there forever. But for them, it was this kind of weird new development in the 70s that they couldn't deal with. And, for anyone getting older, you realize that, that process goes on all the time. So, I think I've only had 3 or 4 generation gaps in the 10 years we've been teaching there, Tanya.
Rise of the Karens.
Well, no, it's like, kids these days, I hear that routinely once every 2 or 3 years for a completely different set of kids.
I am totally that person. Kids these days.
Just wait 2 years, there'll be another set of kids that those kids can rail against.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't like that in my childhood. In my days, we knew what we were doing. We had mobile phones and everything.
I just noticed how young they're getting. It's just terrifying.
Oh, that's a bad sign.
That's because we're just getting older, Tanya.
No. I'm not getting older. They're getting younger.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Yeah.
But
no, it's just.
We
just
have
wait a couple of years.
almost an hour and a half, Lindsay.
Let's get out of here.
It's time for us to wrap this up. So, everyone, thank you for joining us, watching the animation. Thanks, Frank, for asking the pointed questions or pointing out interesting things.
Our audience of one. Thanks, Frank.
No, well, there's a few people watching, but yeah, hidden and skewed over a couple of places. So
keeping a low-key profile.
And we do get a lot of engagement during the week when people watch it at a more reasonable time, not the time that we record it on Tuesday.
Well, who on earth watches stuff live? Seriously.
Well, of course, they're all watching. They're all watching Lego Masters now. So.
Yeah, because we all know free-to-air is dying. So.
Well, I have to say I watch Lego Masters through the 9 Now app. So. Yeah.
Nice. All right.
Anyway, thank you very much, gents. It's nice to have a little chat. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks,
Huge
Frank.
applause. You guys are great. Thank you for putting it together, says Frank. Thank you very much.
Cool.
It's it's kind of our pleasure. We talk about animation all the time, and it's kind of something that we just decided to formalize to put out there. And I wouldn't consider myself an expert on any level. I tend to shelter myself from this stuff, and just know techniques and methods. And I've not watched as much, I suppose. Whereas Dave's watched a lot of stuff but doesn't animate.
No idea about techniques. Stories where I'm at.
Yeah, and Lindsay has lived for centuries in.
Yes, when I was born, we hadn't made it to the moon yet. So 1967. There you go.
That's.
I know, it's weird. I can't even. I mean, my early childhood now feels so abstract. It's just, did that ever happen? It's weird.
You know, from the 80s, where pretty much the lunar program and the space program sort of fell into the.
Well, they were long dead by that point. The only thing that was around was Skylab, and that had fallen into the earth.
No, 80s. You still had the mad dreams of Star Wars.
Yeah, but that was 20 years after putting a man on the moon.
That's right.
It is now 30 years after that. So it's kind of.
Where's our Mars base? Is what you're saying?
Yeah. Where is my Mars base? Where is?
I think we'll have that one for the next session. I think.
Yeah. It's
what was that what's turning into? Old man complaining about their lack of old people.
Where's my spaceship? Damn it. I can put up with no flying cars, but where's my spaceship?
It's probably worth talking about some of those 50s documentaries as well. You know, the space and how the human body works, and the story of menstruation.
Well, that stuff would segue into visual effects as well, because you get people like Douglas Trumbull that was doing documentaries for what was it now?
Lindsay is younger than me, says Frank.
Would you also be looking at the Russian side of those documentaries as well?
Definitely.
Well,
the Russians had a few takes on American pulp fiction. And they also had their own little vision of the future as well, which is interesting. And a lot of that stuff's very compelling stuff.
If you can catch the Russian version of Lord of the Rings.
I've got it somewhere, but it's not translated.
No, you don't even need to. You just watch it, because
it's pretty wild. Yeah, it's good. Interesting to see a second opinion. Yeah. Anyway, I think we're done.
Well, I think we're done. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, audience, and thank you all. And we'll see you in a month's time for the next episode of Lightbox. And we should get maybe a little bit more polished about this.
Yes, we're running.
Take it seriously, Tanya. Anyway.
Absolutely. All right. I'll catch you later. It's been a pleasure to our lone audience member and our two companions.
Sorry?
Good question for next time.
Yes, what were you? Yes, true. Question for next time, Frank. See ya.
All right.